The rain was coming down in steady sheets that night, drumming against the roof of Rosie's diner. Elena wiped down the last of the tables, her tired eyes catching her own reflection in the window, dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, circles under her eyes from too many double shifts. It was past midnight, the hour when the city outside seemed to forget itself, and the only souls who walked through the door were those who didn't want to be seen. The bell above the entrance jingled, and Elena glanced up. A man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, his presence so commanding it seemed the room itself straightened to accommodate him. His black coat dripped with rain, but he moved with deliberate calm, unbothered. His dark eyes swept the diner once before settling on a corner booth, where he sat with the quiet assurance of someone who never had to ask permission. Elena felt her pulse jump. There was something about him, the silence, the weight he carried, that sent a shiver through her. He didn't pull out a phone, didn't look around nervously like the usual late-night customers. He simply sat, hands resting on the table, as if he owned the place. She forced herself to move, not wanting to stare. Grabbing her notepad, she approached. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the strange energy rolling off him. "Coffee," he said, his tone smooth but clipped. His eyes flicked up to hers briefly, sharp enough to make her breath catch. "Black," she nodded, retreating to the counter. Only when her back was turned did she allow herself to exhale. There was danger in that booth, quiet, patient danger. The cook muttered something about closing early, but Elena ignored him. Something told her this customer wouldn't be brushed off. She poured the coffee, set the mug down in front of him, and noticed the faint scar along his jaw, the way his right hand bore small marks, old burns, perhaps. "Anything else?" she asked. He shook his head. And so he sat there, sipping his coffee in silence, while Elena pretended not to glance at him every few minutes. The bell above the door jingled again. This time, two men entered, their laughter too loud, their eyes darting around in a way that screamed trouble. They noticed the man in the booth and exchanged a look before taking seats at the counter. Elena's stomach knotted. She had worked enough late shifts to recognize trouble when it walked in. The quiet stranger didn't react. But Elena swore she saw the faintest tightening of his jaw, the way a predator might sense another predator nearby. Something about this night felt wrong. The diner's bathroom was small, tucked into the back hallway where the hum of the refrigerator drowned out most noises. Elena pushed the door open, intending only to splash her face with water and shake off the unease. But before she could, voices filtered through from just outside, the men who had come in after the stranger. "You sure tonight's the night?" one of them hissed. The other chuckled darkly. "Orders are orders. He won't see it coming. Boss thinks he's untouchable, but every king bleeds the same." Elena froze, her heart pounding so hard she thought they might hear it through the thin walls. They were talking about the man in the booth. The stranger. Her first instinct was denial. She must have misheard. But then came the next words, sharp and unmistakable. "Marco said we wait until he's relaxed. When his guard's down, we move. Quick and clean. He'll never leave this diner alive." Marco. Orders. Betrayal. Elena clamped a hand over her mouth, fear clawing through her chest. Whoever the man in the booth was, his own people had set him up. She should stay out of it. She was just a waitress. This wasn't her fight. If she pretended she hadn't heard, maybe she could finish her shift, go home, and forget. But then an image flashed through her mind. His eyes meeting hers as she poured his coffee, the weight of them, the quiet strength. Alone, but not broken. She couldn't let him die. When the men finally left the hallway, Elena slipped out the other way, her legs trembling as she walked back into the diner. The stranger was still there, sipping his coffee, unbothered. How could she tell him without drawing attention? How could she save him without dooming herself? She forced herself to approach, leaning down as though to clear away his empty mug. Her voice was barely a breath, but she knew he would hear. "Stay quiet," she whispered, her lips hardly moving. "And don't move." For the first time, his eyes truly met hers, sharp and assessing. Something flickered there, recognition, understanding. He didn't ask questions. He didn't flinch. He simply set the mug down, his hand relaxing, his posture shifting ever so slightly. The predator was awake. The diner's neon lights buzzed faintly, casting the room in a sickly glow. Elena's whisper still lingered in the air between them, "Stay quiet. Don't move." The man's expression didn't change much, but something subtle shifted. His hand slid from the table to rest on his lap. She realized with a start that he wasn't resting it there, it was near the inside of his coat. A gun. He'd been ready all along. Alina's pulse raced. She tried to act normal, collecting stray napkins, wiping the counter, but her ears strained for every sound. The two men at the counter laughed too loudly, sipping their coffee, pretending to be ordinary customers. But their eyes flicked to the stranger again and again. Waiting. Her heart hammered in her throat. If they tried something here, in this little diner, she didn't know how many lives would end. The quiet man finally moved, raising his mug to his lips, his eyes locking onto hers over the rim. Calm, controlled, almost reassuring. He understood. And then, as if the universe couldn't bear the tension any longer, it snapped. One of the men at the counter stood abruptly, his hand reaching inside his jacket. It all happened too fast. The stranger flipped the table on its side, coffee shattering across the floor. Gunfire erupted, loud and deafening in the small space. Elena screamed and dove behind the counter, glass raining down as bullets shattered the front window. Down. The man barked, his voice like iron. Elena pressed herself flat, trembling, the world exploding around her. She risked a glance and saw him move with terrifying precision, every shot he fired deliberate, efficient. The men were trained, but he was better. One fell, clutching his chest. The other tried to flank him, firing wildly, but the stranger ducked low and answered with a single shot. Silence followed, broken only by Elena's ragged breathing and the ringing in her ears. The diner smelled of gunpowder and blood. Slowly, the stranger straightened, his movements controlled despite the chaos. He checked the bodies, then turned toward her. His coat was torn, blood darkening the fabric near his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes searched her for injury. Elena shook her head, her throat too tight for words. "Good." He reloaded his gun with practiced ease, sliding it back into his coat. Then his gaze softened, just slightly. "You saved my life." She finally found her voice, though it shook. "Who are you?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he extended his hand to her. "Come with me. If you stay here, you're dead too." Her body refused to move at first. She was just a waitress. She didn't belong in this kind of world. But the look in his eyes wasn't a request, it was a promise. Protection, if she trusted him. And against all reason, Elena reached out and took his hand. The rain pounded harder as they burst out of the diner's back door into the alley. The man's car, a sleek black vehicle that screamed power and money, waited with its engine still running. He ushered her inside, sliding into the driver's seat without hesitation. Tires squealed as they pulled into the night, leaving the broken diner and bodies behind. Elena clutched the seatbelt, her breath coming fast. "Those men, why were they trying to kill you? Who are you?" His jaw clenched as he drove. "The kind of man who makes enemies." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll get for now." The city blurred past, neon signs bleeding into the rain-slick streets. Elena pressed back against the seat, fear and adrenaline fighting for dominance inside her. He finally pulled into an underground garage beneath a towering building. Armed men appeared instantly, some rushing to open the car door, others scanning the area with sharp eyes. Their deference was immediate, he was clearly no ordinary man. "Boss," one of them said, voice taut with concern. "Secure the perimeter," he ordered, not sparing a glance. His focus was on Elena as he guided her into a private elevator. Her mind spun. Boss. Guns. Betrayal. Whoever he was, he lived in a world of violence and control she couldn't begin to comprehend. When the elevator doors opened, she was led into a mansion that looked like it had been carved out of shadow and wealth. Marble floors, glass walls, the faint scent of leather and smoke. He finally spoke again, his voice quieter now. "My name is Dominic Russo." The name landed like a stone in her stomach. She'd heard whispers of it before, rumors about the Russo family, about a man who ran half the city from the shadows. Mafia. Ruthless. Untouchable. Elena's throat went dry. She'd just saved the life of one of the most dangerous men alive. As if reading her thoughts, Dominic turned to her, his dark eyes softer than she expected. "You didn't have to warn me. But you did. That makes you part of this now, whether you like it or not." Her pulse quickened. Part of what? Part of my world. And in that moment, Elena knew her life would never be the same again. The mansion was alive with motion. Guards swept the grounds, radios crackling with terse updates. The air smelled faintly of gun oil and rain-soaked marble. Elena stayed close to Dominic, her nerves on edge, unsure whether to trust her instincts or bolt for the nearest door. Dominic didn't release her hand until they reached his office, a vast room lined with bookshelves and heavy leather furniture. He gestured for her to sit, his own movements taut, controlled, like a predator forced to stay still when every instinct demanded action. Elena lowered herself into the chair, her hands trembling. "You live like this every day." His gaze flicked to her, sharp and unreadable. "Every day. Why?" "Because power demands it." The words made her stomach twist. Power. That was the language of kings and criminals, not of waitresses who worked double shifts to pay rent. Dominic poured himself a glass of amber liquid, but instead of drinking it, he set it aside. He leaned back, watching her. "You're wondering why I didn't let them kill me. Why I fight to stay alive." "I wasn't," she faltered, then sighed. "Maybe I was. Because the people who want me dead aren't strong enough to replace me. And if they succeed, the city bleeds more than it already does." His tone was low, steady, carrying the weight of conviction. "Better a devil you know than chaos you don't." Elena shivered. The truth in his words unsettled her more than the lies might have. "And me?" she asked. "Why bring me here?" Dominic's eyes softened, if only a fraction. "Because you saved my life. That makes you a target. If I left you on your own, they'd find you." The realization struck her like a blow. She wasn't just trapped in his world, she was marked by it now. Elena pressed her palms together to stop them from shaking. "So I have no choice." "You have choices," Dominic said quietly. "But none of them led back to the life you had before." The silence between them was heavy, filled with things Elena didn't want to admit. She should have felt resentment. Fear. But beneath the chaos of the night, another feeling stirred, something dangerously close to trust. The nights at the mansion grew quieter in the days that followed. Too quiet. Elena began to sense it the way one senses a storm before the clouds roll in, an unease that tugged at her even when the guards reassured her everything was secure. Dominic remained calm on the surface, but she noticed the changes. The longer hours in his office. The clipped conversations with his men. The way his hand strayed closer to the weapon at his side whenever the door opened unexpectedly. One evening, as she cleared the empty dishes from their dinner, Dominic spoke without looking up from his glass of whiskey. "They'll come again," he said simply. The words made Elena freeze, the porcelain plate trembling in her hands. "You sound certain." "Betrayal doesn't die with one bullet," he murmured. His gaze lifted to hers, dark and steady. "It breeds. It spreads." Elena set the plate down carefully, her throat tight. "And what happens when it spreads to me?" The question hung heavy between them. Dominic stood, crossing the room in slow, deliberate steps. When he stopped before her, his hand rose, brushing against her cheek in a touch so gentle it contradicted the violence of his world. "I won't let them touch you." His voice was low, almost a vow. "Not while I breathe." But the storm broke faster than either of them expected. It was a Wednesday night when the betrayal struck again. Elena was in the library, curled up with a book she hadn't really been reading, when the lights flickered. The sudden darkness pressed down like a warning. Then came the sound, glass shattering, men shouting, gunfire splitting the silence. Elena's heart lurched into her throat. She bolted for the hall but stopped when she saw shadows moving outside the window. Figures dressed in black, faces covered. Not strangers. Not invaders. These were men she recognized, men who had guarded the gates in the daylight, men who had bowed their heads respectfully when Dominic walked by. The betrayal had rooted deeper than either of them imagined. "Elena!" Dominic's voice roared through the chaos. She turned to see him racing toward her, weapon drawn, fury in his eyes. "Stay with me." She barely had time to nod before a gunshot cracked past her ear, splintering the wood of the doorway. Dominic pushed her down, returning fire with a lethal precision that froze her blood. The mansion erupted into a war zone. Betrayers against loyalists, bullets shredding the air. Dominic shielded Elena with his body as they moved, guiding her toward the reinforced doors of his office. "Get inside," he barked, shoving her through the frame. "Stay down." But before he could follow, two men lunged from the shadows. Elena screamed as they tackled him, weapons clattering against the marble floor. Her blood went cold. She had one chance, one decision. She grabbed the small knife from Dominic's desk, her hand shaking, and darted forward. The blade sliced into one man's arm, forcing him to release Dominic with a howl. Dominic didn't hesitate, he slammed the second man into the wall, snapping his neck with brutal efficiency. Breathless, Dominic pulled Elena against him, his voice rough with urgency. "Never run from me again." "I wasn't running," she whispered, trembling. "I was fighting." His eyes met hers, fire and steel, and for the first time, he believed her. But the night wasn't finished. The gunfire outside grew louder, closer. The traitors weren't just trying to kill Dominic anymore. They were trying to tear down everything he had built. And Elena was now in the center of it. By dawn, the mansion was scarred. Smoke curled from shattered windows, the scent of blood and gunpowder thick in the halls. Dominic stood in the wreckage of his empire, Elena at his side. His men, what remained of them, brought forward the prisoners, those who had chosen betrayal. Their faces were bruised, their pride broken, but their eyes still gleamed with defiance. Dominic approached them slowly, his presence more dangerous than any weapon. "You thought you could gut me in my own home," he said, his voice quiet but carrying like thunder. "You thought wrong." One of the traitors spat at his feet. "Your time is ending, Dominic. You can't stop it." Dominic's expression didn't flicker. He raised his gun and fired once. The man crumpled, silence falling over the courtyard. Elena flinched, but she didn't look away. Not this time. She had chosen to stand beside him, and that meant seeing him for who he truly was, the devil they feared, and the protector she'd come to trust. One by one, the remaining traitors were dragged away. Justice in Dominic's world was swift, merciless. By the time the sun rose fully, the mansion was quiet again. Dominic finally turned to Elena, exhaustion etched into his face. For the first time, he seemed less like an untouchable king and more like a man who had bled, endured, and survived. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Then why did you keep me?" she asked. His eyes searched hers, and this time, there was no mask, no armor. "Because when everyone else betrayed me, you didn't." Elena's chest tightened, her throat burning with unshed tears. She thought of the diner, the whispered warning, the moment she told him to stay quiet and don't move. The chain of choices that had led them here. She stepped closer, her voice steady despite the storm in her heart. "Then don't send me away now." Dominic studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, as if sealing a pact. "Your life won't ever be the same again, Elena. Not with me." She lifted her chin. "Maybe that's what I want." And as the first light of dawn spilled across the broken mansion, Dominic reached for her hand, the same hand that had once trembled in fear, now steady in his grasp. Together, they stood amidst the ruins of betrayal, bound by something stronger than survival. Not just a warning, not just a bond, but a promise.